There was an unusual chill over the village tonight. Not many people were on the streets after hours. The whole city seemed to be getting ready to slumber down into a hibernation state. The foliage surrounding the city also looked to be a bit dimmer. I began to notice it a couple days ago when I was out in the grasslands. Aurelio and I hung out a couple of times throughout his short break here. He showed me the new magic he learned at school, and I'd watch in amazement. In turn, he would tag along my daily chores, keeping me occupied with conversation. He'd stay at my house till late hours of the night, studying on my bed, while I kept myself busy at my desk. I didn't have anything to show him like he did for me, but I enjoyed our time together, however we chose to spend it. And I think he felt the same way too. It was comforting having him back here, even if it was just a short while. Today was his last day. We both agreed he should at least spend last night with his family. With nothing to do, I decided it would be the perfect night to go visit the cave. I made my way through the town and into the forest. The sun was just beginning to disappear over the horizon line. I could see through the spaces between the trees when I looked behind me. With the dying sun to my back, I dove into the enchanted darkness. I hurried through the familiar paths I've been taking for years. Night had already fallen by the time I was halfway there. The chill followed me into the forest, but I shrugged it off. Maybe Aurelio was right. It wasn't completely unusual for temperatures to drop this time of the year. I hugged my shawl tighter. There was no threat it would fly away, but the wind had a way of sneaking into the smallest of crevices and sending cold air under it and onto my skin. My shawl was quite big, its lowest point being a couple inches from the ground. It was pinned together by a large button in the front. A big gust of wind rushed by, hitting me hard. So hard I had to stop, close my eyes, and put a hand in front of my face, my other still holding the shawl closed at the front. The wind pushed my hair and shawl back. I heard both whipping in the wind behind me. After the gust went past, I was left cold all over. My arms and shoulders sprouted patches of goosebumps, and my hands felt so cold I could be mistaken for doing ice magic. I made a raspberry with chattering teeth. So cold. In the silence that followed, I looked up to the trees above. I could see stars peeking through the chattering leaves. The moon was absent tonight, a new moon. It truly felt like the start of winter. For a moment, all sounds came to a stop. The wind, the critters, the sound of my breathing even stopped. I spun around with my hands spread up and my head tilted towards the sky. I breathed in and out. The cold forest air mixed with my body's warm air. My hair fluttered in the wind. Despite everything on my mind, I allowed myself to find peace in this moment. Then, there was an out-of-place sound. At first it was quiet, unintelligible echoes that came from deep in the woods. I walked closer towards it. I weaved through trees and listened as the sounds got louder and louder. They began morphing from simple sounds to blurred speech. When I was close enough, I realized it was a voice I was hearing. It was an adult man's voice. This confused me. People didn't usually come out this far into the forest at night. I crept closer towards the man's voice. It was hushed but stern. It sounded like royal palace speech. There's superfluous speech patterns and distinct accents. This was double weird. Someone from the royal palace here in the enchanted forest? It takes a day to get down to the town by carriage, and over an hour of an experienced forester to wander this far. What business could this royal man have here? It also sounded very familiar, a voice I had heard over and over again, but from where? I finally stumbled upon a tiny clearing. In the middle of it was the man I'd been hearing, along with 4 other people. They were all dressed in long black robes with hoods over their faces, huddled in a circle. I lost count of how many red flags had been raised in my head. I hid behind a tree and peeked my head around it in an attempt to spy on them. I'm scared for the future of this home. With all the light he's gathered so far, there very well be nothing able to stop his plans, the tallest figure spoke. This was the man I had been hearing. He seemed to be the leader of the group. I was confused. Who is this person, and what plans were they talking about? A shorter person spoke up. Your Majesty, we cannot think that. There's still plenty we can do to stop him. We just haven't found the answer yet. We have the greatest minds in the realm currently. Night and day, we are thinking of a way to solve this problem. Trust us, sir. We won't let him win. Do you think any of that matters? The leader sounded angry. Noctis may level me in power, but what makes him greater is that he has no guilt. He could wipe out a whole village like it's another day. Noctis feeds off of violence and war. What he has to do, or who he has to kill, doesn't concern him. He'll do anything as long as he wins. Noctis. This was a name I didn't recognize. I didn't want to be too judgmental, but from the description of him, he was the type of guy I wouldn't want to run into on the streets. Do we have the exact numbers on how much light he's stolen? Another man with a brittle voice spoke up. No, but it's beginning to be enough to show in parts of the enchanted forest. There's signs of wilting in the lower parts, near the borders to the dark realm. Thankfully, it hasn't shown anywhere near the people. We must keep it this way. Once they notice something is wrong, then they'll begin to ask questions. The progression of his plan may speed up, though. It's been discovered that he plans to steal light from the goddess. There were loud gasps from everyone that surrounded him. All of them began saying words of protest. Unbelievable. That can't be. Horrifying. Well, almost all of them. There was one guard, the one standing closest to me, who I didn't hear anything come out of his mouth. He'd been standing there, silent this whole time, and with his head slightly tilted downwards. Quiet, 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 the leader shouted. There's been enough said tonight. I think we should end it here. Time is ticking. We can't afford to spend any more time talking and not doing. For now, we don't let any information leave this circle. Got it? He looked at each of them. Everyone nodded in understanding. Now, these hoods are so stuffy. Remind me why we decided to wear them? It's not like anyone comes out this far into the forest. Sir, I believe it's because so stuffy. I just can't take it anymore. The leader had been doing his best to fan cold air into his hood, but he finally gave up. With a groan, he reached to pull down his hood. This was it. I'd finally found out who this mysterious man was. I held my breath in anticipation, which, in retrospect, was not the smartest idea, because as soon as I saw who was underneath, I almost fainted. The man a couple feet away from me was revealed to be the king. When light of the stars fell over his face, it illuminated his features and washed away any doubt of his identity. I leaned forward to try and get a better look, still in shock. My grip loosened and my hand slipped off the tree. Crunch! In an attempt to catch myself from falling forward, I stepped onto a twig. The talking stopped. The king and his hooded guards turned towards the sound. I quickly ducked behind a tree and held my breath. I looked around to see if they had lost interest. My breath hitched as I made eye contact with glowing golden eyes. It was the silent guard closest to me. He turned his back to the king and murmured something unintelligible, his first words of the night. Then he turned back towards my direction and began walking towards the tree I was hiding behind. My fight or flight kicked in. I had to run. I turned to a random direction and booked it. I didn't look back, afraid that the image of someone following me would make me freeze up, but I could hear them. There was a second pair of footsteps traveling behind me, getting closer every second. This sent adrenaline to my veins. I tried my best to move my legs faster. I took random sharp turns and squeezed between thick bushes in an attempt to lose a person on my tail. Twigs and leaves ripped my skin open as I sped by. Cuts formed on my arms, legs, and face. Just keep running, I told myself, over and over and over again. At some point, I stopped hearing the guard following me. Unable to continue, I decided to rest. Immediately, I folded over, with my hands on my knees. I gasped for air. My lungs burned. Inhale and exhale, I told myself. White puffs left my mouth on every exhale, swirling around my face and then dissipating as quickly as it had formed. I felt dizzy. I ran as far as I could without stopping. At first, I contemplated going back home. I could slip into my bed and drift off. I'd wake up and forget this ever happened, but I knew that had risks. Mother, for instance, would undeniably be dragged into this mess if they ever found me out. This left me in a bad position. Where would I go? Other than my heavy breathing, I couldn't hear any urgent sounds indicating there were guards close by. Relief overtook me. I closed my eyes and tried my best to tune into the natural sounds of the forest. The rustle of the leaves, the howling of the wind, the scattering of wild insects and animals. Everything seemed normal, except for the fact that I heard something I knew I wasn't supposed to. Suddenly, a sound came from deep in the woods on my left. I jumped. The legends, I thought. Again, my mind raced with fear. What if the king's words were true? If beings from the dark realm were trying to destroy the light realm, what would stop them from wandering these very woods? They could be stalking my every move, aware that I heard of their plans. They could be planning to kill me. I heard another sound. It came from the same direction. At first, I thought someone was hiding in the bushes, but after hearing it a second time, I realized it was a soft whistling noise. I held my breath to get a better listen. It was incredibly quiet and came in uneven bursts. I recognized that whistle. It was the same sound that came from the cave. In the midst of my panic, I had forgotten my original tent for tonight. My feet must have automatically brought me towards the cave. The whistling noise meant I was close. This is when a thought struck me. I could hide out there till morning. No one knew of its existence. I'd be completely safe. With a pep in my stride, I quickly made my way to the cave. I dashed through the entrance and into the smaller tunnel. I immediately turned left, and after running down the corridor, I jumped into the slide. I shot out of the cave entrance. After so many years of coming down here, I no longer fell flat on my back. Instead, I was able to slow down to a halt at the end of the slide, in a sitting position with both feet planted on the ground. A zillion thoughts were still bubbling inside my head, but at least I was safe. I didn't know how long I planned to hide out here, but I suspected I would be here for a few hours. I was satisfied with that, though. The plants here calmed me down. Their subtle glow, like a small candle, a reminder of the light, even in the thickest darkness. A chilly breeze snapped me out of my thoughts. Was it darker in here? I realized I could barely see my legs, or hands for that matter. Usually there was enough light to be able to read a novel. I looked up at the plants, and what I saw horrified me. Everywhere I looked, the glow of the plants was gone, with only a handful still flickering with a dying light. Not only was the bioluminescence in the plants gone, they were wilting. Leaves were black and crumpled. I reached out to touch one, and it was stiff. I squeezed it, and it turned to dust between my fingers. I watched the dust fly away in the wind. Other parts of the plants were spotted with dark colors. It looked like they were rotting. Through my confusion, I connected the dots. This is what the king was worried about. Noctis, the dark realm's king, was planning to wake the sleeping goddess and steal her powers and destroy the light realm. He would plunge the light into an eternal darkness. I still couldn't believe it. I rubbed my eyes. I hoped this was all a nightmare. No matter how hard I rubbed, the rotting landscape in front of me stayed the same. This was the future of the light realm, my home. I'm not sure how long I stood there in shock, but eventually I sat down and let the tears flow. I stayed there for a while. I headed home when I felt it was safe enough to leave the cave. The trip back was slow. I walked through the same forest I'd mentioned for years, but now there was a new heaviness that suffocated it. When I arrived at the fields bordering the town, I reached the same one Mother had once comforted me in. I occasionally paused to close my eyes, partially because of my fatigue and partially because I was reminiscing over memories of times that didn't hold so much weight. Once I got home, I crashed onto my bed. Tomorrow, Aurelio would go back to the royal kingdom. I decided to tell him my plans before he left. As for my mother, there's no way she would let me go through with this, so I settled on writing her notes. I would wake up in a couple of hours, as soon as the sun rose, just after Mother went to the fields for the day. If I didn't leave tomorrow, then I would never gather enough courage to leave at all. I woke up with a fervor. I quickly wrote a note and left it to meet up with Aurelio. When I got to the carriage station, I saw him standing there, his back faced towards me. He was back in his palace clothing. The morning sun reflected off of the gold in his outfit and made him look heavenly. I would miss him, but I knew magic was his passion. I would support his dream, even if it took him so far. I walked up to Aurelio and tapped his shoulder. He spun around with a smile. Luciferine. He took my hand in his. You really cut it close. I thought I'd have to board without saying bye to you. You have so much hope in me, don't you? I said. I wrapped my arms around his waist and leaned my head onto his shoulder. I didn't raise my head in fear that he'd notice my wet eyes. I knew he knew, though. He always did. He wrapped one arm around my waist and rubbed the upper part of my back with his other hand. Come on, Lucy. I'll be back in a few months. You know this. I nodded my head. I did know that. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Him being gone was becoming more normal than him being here, and I hated that. Even if I loved the time I spent alone in the forest, I also loved his company. He was my greatest friend. Yeah, I know. I felt the lump in my throat. The bell for the carriage rang out 3 times. It was time for him to go. We stayed in an embrace for a moment longer. Then I let go. I watched him board. The carriage was small. Not many people flew in and out of the castle, especially on small breaks. He was the only passenger. He chose the seat closest to me so he could still talk to me over the railings. I'll learn so much that you'll blow your brains out the next time I show you my magic. I bet you will, I said. We broke out into a warm laughter. I tried my best to savor this sweet moment. It was now or never. I had to tell him. I'm leaving. Aurelio's smile dropped. What? I'm going into the enchanted forest, and I'm not coming back until I figure out what's been affecting the light realm. Aurelio looked at me with wide eyes. I'm sorry? I'm having a hard time following. I rolled my eyes. You're thinking about leaving to roam the enchanted forest to find a problem that might not even exist? Yeah, precisely, I said. Aurelio gripped the railing. Lucy. He opened and closed his mouth, looking for the right words. He looked like a goldfish out of water. This is crazy. What's got you so riled up enough to say all this? Suddenly, the bell announcing the carriage's departure rang out. I smiled. My plan worked. You wouldn't understand, but don't worry. I've got it all sorted out. The carriage began to rise. So you decide to tell me right as I'm leaving? I mean, seriously, what's up with that timing? That's the point. I told you so you wouldn't try to stop me. At this point, he was a couple feet off the ground. We began shouting at each other because of the distance. That's totally unfair. Do you know how many friendship codes this breaks? I am so unbelievably mad at you right now. His face was slowly turning red. I couldn't tell if it was because we were shouting or because he was absolutely livid. You're going to get yourself killed, Luciferine. Again, don't sweat it. Just focus on your studies at the palace. I'll be back by the time you come home from break. I began walking back the way I came. I turned towards the carriage one last time. I'm going to save our home. At this point, he was fuming. If I squinted hard enough, I think I could see steam coming out of his ears. I gave one last wave and turned away. It took a couple of moments until he was far enough away to where I couldn't hear his angry shouts. With no one in my way, I was ready to make the journey of a lifetime. It didn't matter what might be out there. I was ready for it all. This is what I told myself as I headed in the direction of the enchanted forest.